Good afternoon and welcome to the 2024 Capstone presentations of 3 IHC Public Humanities Graduate Fellows. I'm Susan Derwin. I'm the Director of the Public Humanities Program and of the IHC, and I'm very happy that you're all here to learn about the work of that our 3 fellows have done, and I am confident that you'll be inspired and impressed by their accomplishments. I also want to introduce Chris Boberg, the IHC Associate Director. Chris coordinates the Public Humanities Program, and he also teaches one of the seminars. Please allow me to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center is located, and also to pay respect to elders, past and present, as well as other Indigenous people present. I will start by giving you a little background. So the Public Humanities Graduate Fellows Program was launched 6 years ago with the purpose of preparing PhD students for careers as publicly engaged humanists, both inside and outside of the academy. The program is independent of any single department, and it brings together about 40 PhD students from across the humanities and humanistic social sciences. Fellows in the program complete 2 seminars. The first addresses the theories, pedagogies, and cultural practices associated with the public humanities, as well as the institutional history of the land-grant university system. The second seminar acquaints students with the skills they need to work in the public sphere, such as how to communicate skillfully with diverse groups and communities, and how to build and sustain relationships with community partners. Students also develop basic digital skills, study grant writing and budget creation and project management, and they learn how to write and podcast for diverse audiences. In addition to coursework, Public Humanities Fellows complete a paid 200-hour community-based internship with a partnering organization. This might be a cultural foundation, an arts nonprofit, a governmental office, a community center, or a social justice or humanitarian NGO. After completing their internship, fellows can also elect to develop and execute their own community-based project. And finally, to complete their training, each fellow makes a capstone presentation in which they discuss the work they have done in the program and how they understand the purpose of the public humanities, as well as their evolving identities as scholars and public humanists. Today, once our 3 fellows have each made their presentation, we will have an audience Q&A with them, so prepare your questions as you are listening. We'll cluster the questions at the end. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our first presenter, Megan J. Sheard. Megan is a PhD candidate in the History of Art and Architecture department. She researches the materiality of colonial architecture in Tasmania, considering how convict sites transformed Aboriginal land into architectural materials. She has worked in diverse roles at the intersection of craft and community, including teaching textiles and woodworking, practicing as a community artist, and teaching literature to incarcerated students through the IHC Foundations in the Humanities program. She is currently based in Hobart, Tasmania, where she will be completing field and archival research, and next year also writing her dissertation. So please welcome Megan with us on the screen. She's coming up, and Megan, thank you for joining us in this remote way.
Thanks, Susan. My name is Megan Sheard. As Susan introduced me, I'm a PhD candidate in the History of Art and Architecture program. My public engagement fellowship was with the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation in the summer of 2023, where I was working on content creation for the Trust's public programming. The Trust is a non-profit organisation founded in the early 1960s and the major driver in the restoration of the Presidio de Santa Barbara. The organisation has since acquired several other historic properties in the neighbourhood, and in recent years has oriented its focus toward celebrating the diverse histories of the people who have occupied the neighborhood, including histories of the Chinatown and Nihonmachi or Japantown that occupied this area in the early 20th century. And since my own research focuses on colonial architecture and landscape transformation in connection with Aboriginal histories in Tasmania, I brought to my fellowship an interest in architectural materials and in thinking about how we might draw on the insights of decolonial scholarship to make practical changes at colonial sites that have become tourist attractions. Prior to the fellowship, I completed the 2 coursework seminars. The skills class was incredibly useful to me in creating space to work through some of the nitty-gritty tasks that I tend to avoid, such as formatting a CV really nicely, practicing presentation timings, or writing short pieces tailored to different purposes. As someone who feels more comfortable in big ideas than everyday organizational tasks, this let me experience the positive reinforcement from being pleased with the end results and demystified polish as something achievable for chaotic creative thinkers like myself. And the most important aspect of the theory class for me was in getting to see a range of public humanities case studies and how they were navigating their relationships with institutions and funding bodies. These included projects connected in some way with traditional universities, such as Diana Taylor's work with the Hemispheric Institute, focusing on politics and performance in the Americas, as well as projects operating outside the university and funded by various grants, such as through the National Endowment for the Humanities. My work at the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation focused on lesson plan creation for site visits with school-age students, in particular in the Where We Are From project for middle schoolers that emphasises the layered migrant histories of people who have lived in the space. This required learning the history of a site basically from scratch, especially as I didn't grow up in the US. So I spent a lot of time in this building that you see at left, which houses the archival collections, library, and object collections, learning about both the specific neighborhood and also the broader themes of Spanish, Mexican, and US colonial history in California, as well as California Native and Asian American history. I also participated in the new collections committee initiated by the Trust's archivist Des Alanis, a project addressing language equity in archival materials and descriptions. And it was really eye-opening for me to be able to use my training as an architectural historian to work through site histories using physical spaces and plans within the focused context of using materials held by the Trust. For example, I drew on plans and historic photographs of the former Japanese Buddhist church to create a lesson where students remap the outline of the structure, overlapping where the Presidio Chapel is today, using origami lotus flowers as a way of imagining a built environment no longer easily accessible to our shared imagination. And you can see some excerpts from that lesson planning here at the right. I also help prepare for and staff public events hosted by the Trust, such as the Asian American Neighborhood Festival held in October, which you see here. The Public Humanities Graduate Fellows Program has helped me to realise that there are models and funding for doing theoretically robust but publicly accessible work. And importantly, my internship at the Trust was the most disarming relationship I've ever had with an institution. I found my own priorities around indigenising colonial site histories were really welcomed, which gave me confidence to make choices orienting my work in that direction. Including relationship building that was outside official job descriptions, in particular with Chumash Community and Trust Board member Ani Maria Elena Lopez. And finding that I wasn't working against resistance in the way I'd perhaps imagined gave me a taste of working toward shared goals with others who also want to see changes in their institutions, which made me feel more hopeful about either working within or in partnership with a university or historic institution administering colonial sites that are visited by the general public in the future. One of the things I've come to appreciate about the public humanities is the way it responds to critiques of elitism and inaccessibility, often leveled at traditional academic work. And it does this in a concrete way by creating a discourse and structures to support community engaged work, making it a more realistic possibility for scholars. The program also made me consider how public humanities can go beyond translating academic knowledge into accessible formats to include a larger community in knowledge production itself. And while this isn't the kind of work I was engaged in explicitly, my time at the Trust helped me see that even established institutions can have openings for that kind of work when they take relationship building seriously. This is directly relevant to my graduate work, which involves engaging with Indigenous communities, as well as with the institutions managing historic colonial sites. And my fellowship gave me a more nuanced understanding of the organisational structures involved in administering these sites, as well as what a goldmine of expertise people like site archaeologists and archivists are, something that is already making my approach to research sites here in Tasmania more relational. In reflecting on myself as a practitioner of the public humanities, I've realised that what engages me most is the potential intersection between critical knowledge production oriented towards social change and the possibility of more devolved forms of community power. I've often felt torn between my commitment to theoretically robust work and my politics around community participation and control, perceiving a trade-off between them. My participation in the program has given me an experience of how those things might come together within small local organisations, as I was able to find ways to mobilise theoretical understandings drawn from my studies of colonial architecture and material culture in ways that could be accessible to a broader community, including young people. Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next Public Humanities Fellow, Guilhem Belmar-Biernes, a PhD candidate in the Department of Linguistics. Guilhem studies language minoritization and the strategies for language revitalization and maintenance. He is currently focused on community-based documentation and language maintenance projects for Mixtepa Mixtec, which is one of the Mixtec languages spoken in the lower Mixteca region of Mexico, and Purépecha, the language of a group of indigenous people centered in the northwestern region of Michoacan, Mexico. Everyone's nodding, thank you. He is part of JSILO, a collaboration between Mixtec language interpreters and academic linguists, and in September, Guilhem will join the Department of Linguistics at the University of Oregon as an assistant professor, which is extremely exciting. So welcome, Guilhem.
Hi, thank you. Welcome everyone, thanks for coming. So I'm going to be talking about my fellow design project, Kusikira Kutuasa Ansabi, which means play and learn Mixtec. I want to start, I know Susan already did it, but briefly acknowledging that the lands that UCSB stands on are unceded, stolen, and occupied from the Chumash people, and I wanted to start with that. The community that I've worked with for this particular project is the community from San Juan Mixtepec in the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. You can see here in the maps where the state of Oaxaca is located inside of Mexico, in the district of Huxlahuaca, in the orange area. There we find this municipality of San Juan Mixtepec. There's a lot of people from San Juan Mixtepec also living elsewhere in Mexico, and particularly in California, particularly in Santa Maria, Lompoc, and also in Guadalupe, here in Santa Barbara. So I've been working with the community both in the municipality in Mexico, but also here in California. This is a collaborative work. There's been a ton of collaborators for this. Here you see a picture of some of them. The name of collaborators whose work will be featured in the presentation, but this would not have been possible alone, obviously. And I just want to mention Jeremiah Salazar, who's my main collaborator, who is featuring the three pictures you have here. and he's in all of the projects basically that we've been involved in with the community. The projects that I will be talking about today are two projects. One is a video game, Ti Nyakatsu, or like Catch the Food, and Kabisan Sabi, or Read in Mixtec. The first one, the video game, this was something that Jeremias asked us to design something to teach kids some vocabulary in Mixtec. And as we were designing it, he also thought, you know what, maybe we should also teach something about healthy eating. There's a huge problem in Mexico with sodas, for example. So you can see the little man here catching the food, and you can learn the vocabulary. You can also have audio. I just silenced the audio for the presentation. But if you catch the fries or the sodas, you lose life as well. So it's also an attempt to show something else. And we designed this in a way that could be easily adapted to other languages, and so you actually just change now to Purepecha as well. Anyone can download it, and it's very easily to adapt it to another language in your computer.
Yeah.
The Kabisan Sabi project, or Read in Mixtec project, this was something that we decided to make sure that the outcomes that we had from recording people, stories that they were telling us. This is normally what it looks like when we transcribe it for ourselves, linguists, and then we have it in an archive. But this is not very friendly for communities, and so we decided we need to do something with it. And we translated them into a format that could work for storybooks for kids. And we also made little videos with them. There's monolingual versions, only Mixtec, but also we have trilingual versions in both Spanish and in English. And we also created some other format for just with the picture, so that it can be a little bit more entertaining for kids as well. You can hear what the language sounds like. So apart from this, now we're organizing community events. We're going to have storytelling evenings with children in 5 different villages in the municipality of San Juan Mixtepec. There's a community, there's a committee of 4 people in the community that have been talking to the local authorities, and we've got their permission to have these storytelling evenings. And we're organizing a storytelling evening also at a public library in Santa Maria, which hopefully will take place this month. It may actually be in June, but hopefully this month. So the program gave me a lot of space to grow as a public humanist, but also a lot of tools for this project. Particularly the skills course gave me a lot of practice with grant writing and budgeting. Actually, the first grant I applied to as a graduate student, I did the grant writing while I was in that class, and it was successful. So a lot of also writing for the public. And in the history and theory course, it was a place to also have this reflection on the value for public humanities, but also the program as a whole as a place to feel that your work is valued as well, right? That it's something that you're not just doing something that is not good science, but it's actually valued and it's actually worth your time. Some of the lessons that I want to share with you from doing this sort of work and also from being in the program. Learning how to coordinate different groups, learning how to coordinate different people in different locations with very different agendas, very different paces for work. Also, public-facing discourse. So I remember when I was thinking about the public writing, being like, maybe I thought that was not the most useful of the things that we were learning, but actually you also have to talk to people, and the same skills can very easily transfer to that, right? When we're talking, for example, with the local authorities. And well, sending things to Mexico is actually complicated. So one of the first package that I sent with the storybooks to Mexico, we're still looking for it. Hopefully it will appear someday. But I can happily report that the second package arrived. Somebody who came to a conference this weekend actually took it with them at the plane, and it's there. So the books have arrived to the municipality. As for how the program fits or has impacted me as a researcher, this has always been a big part of my work. I believe that all the language work that we do needs to be made in a way that is useful and that it attracts the attention of the community, and it's done with the community, right? Possibly because of my own background. This is where I come from. I'm a Catalan, and most of my work is very influenced by this position of being part of a minoritized, stateless community. And language minorization has always been part of who I am, and language activism has always been part of me. And so I got into academia from activism, not the other way around. And so this has been a very welcome space so that I can still continue doing this. And UCSB is actually a very welcoming space as a whole, at least in my experience. And so I just wanted to say thank you for having spaces where this positionality in your research is actually encouraged, not just accepted. And thanks. That's some information there in our social medias and websites if you want to take a look at our resources. Thank you.
I don't know if this is a word, but I'll say our third capstoner is Maria Anna Zazzarino, a PhD candidate in the Comparative Literature program. Maria's areas of interest include extractivism and environmental justice, with a particular focus on the cultures from the wider Caribbean region. She is a member of the IHC's Recentering Energy Justice, RFG, and she has worked on a number of public-facing exhibitions and literary events, including the Delta Mouth Festival in Baton Rouge and the Hay Festival for Literature and the Arts in Segovia, Spain. Currently, Marie is a research assistant for the Global Latinidades Center, where she is helping coordinate the Action Research Exchange Program, Global Spain. So please help me welcome Maria.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. My name is Maria, and I'm a PhD candidate in the program in comparative literature here at UCSB. And today I will share with you my experience as a public humanities fellow. I completed my practicum with an internship at Santa Barbara's Community Environmental Council. This is a nonprofit organization that focuses on actionable climate solutions around multiple nodes of climate justice. With so many initiatives that my sketch here will be necessarily incomplete, so I suggest that you visit their website. I have included it here on my slides if you're curious to learn more about all of the different initiatives that they have. Some of them, just to give you a very brief summary, are some of the most prominent areas of activity include advocating for plastic reduction laws, promoting food recovery programs, helping communities implement affordable fossil-free solutions, and working with frontline communities most affected by climate change, especially here in the California Central Coast. When I began my practicum at the CEC was just about to inaugurate this space called the Environmental Hub. It is located on State Street, and it houses multiple organizations and CEC staff members. It includes co-working spaces, a media lab, as well as an atrium that allows for multiple forms of public programming. This is me my first week at the Hub, where I volunteered for a fundraiser called the Green Gala, an event that helped me meet a lot of the CEC team members and participate in a fun live auction, something that I had never done before. So that folder is for me to signal who had claimed one of the auctioned items. One of the CC's aims was to make this space a hub for public engagement. My role was to help the organization conceptualize a public arts program that could foster community engagement and cultivate positive imaginaries about human relationships with the environment. Planning for this program became the core of my internship at the CEC, so much so that my title changed to the beautiful name of the Climate Arts Fellow. This was a new project for everyone, both for CEC leadership and staff, as well as myself. In this sense, it was a challenge given that we were all trying to figure out the best process to begin exploring the possibility of creating this program from scratch. Since I had no prior experience in nonprofits, especially one with such a large structure, I learned the importance of involving multiple stakeholders as publics and as participants in these early stages of project design. My first task involved designing surveys to understand how the organization was collectively envisioning this space and to integrate what CEC members and affiliates considered important for the project. My subsequent goal was to integrate all of these varying positions into mission and vision statements that would be succinct but capacious enough to represent all survey participants. The next step was ensuring the project would have an inclusive and fair process. My task here was to help CEC configure an advisory committee, which involved written communication with potential members, drafting letters, and outlining committee duties and commitments. These included arts institutions along the Central Coast, including the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art, the Music Academy of the West, and many other participants, including public school teachers and youth arts enthusiasts. This culminated in the first committee meeting in December 2023, which was the most critical deliverable in my position as a Climate Arts Fellow. Along the way, I used my research skills to understand how transformative arts projects are implemented in California and the US, identifying the projects that allow for community collaboration and the areas of opportunity for the CEC with their existing resources. What they needed from me, in sum, was to build an initial compendium of materials that could help them communicate the structure, aim, and potential actions of the project. In my public humanities coursework, I learned multiple skills that allowed me to perform these tasks successfully. I learned about the history of the public humanities and different approaches from awareness raising to collaborative knowledge production. As a final project in our skills class, I also worked on a mock grant proposal where I identified a need, situated the project, and evaluated possible contributions. This practical exercise helped me immensely in producing documents for the CEC. At the same time, my experience at the CEC helped me rehearse different formats of presenting information. For example, I had to learn to turn long reports, 15-page reports, into more efficient one-page statements that could still represent all of the findings in some of these documents that I created. The value of the public humanities is the ability to think about how to produce ideas in a multi-directional way. Public humanists can be powerful mediators between different publics who might have similar goals but may be approaching a problem or situation from different angles. The public humanities is an activity of translation amongst different stakes or groups. For example, in the Climate Arts Project, entailed bringing together an environmental organization and local cultural arts institutions. The CEC had ideas about how the arts could help further their mission, but they are not necessarily in the arts. The arts community's expertise lies in knowing the art scene and the possibilities of publicly engaged art, but they are not necessarily engaged in climate activism. I myself have prior experience curating environmental arts projects, but these experiences have been in institutions in the arts sector. The CEC is a very different kind of location, so I myself had to think about my assumptions and how to translate them into a new setting with different goals. how to bridge this gap, allowing for enough openness so that these two positions can converge, is something that I think the public humanities is well equipped to achieve. My experience in the public humanities program has changed my perspectives on research and pedagogy. As a literary scholar, it has allowed me to reevaluate what counts as a meaningful story in the materials I examine, and how to orient my questions to better bridge this gap between the humanities and environmental questions. At the same time, I now incorporate environmental justice methods in the classes I have had the opportunity to teach, including exercises that allow students to tell their own environmental stories. While the role of the public humanities is an ongoing question, I will continue collaborating with organizations outside the academy. For example, this summer, I will participate in an action research workshop involving more than 10 grassroots organizations, allowing me to refine my understanding of the public humanities in a different setting. As I continue to hone these skills, my goal is to become a better facilitator and listener and find ways of reframing the ways we do both research and practice. Thank you, IHC, for this opportunity, and I look forward for a Q&A discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentations. Really looking forward to be a part of a fellow of this of the fellowship. And my question, I guess, is more for Jim and Megan. So I know that you are working in countries other than the U.S., and I was wondering what are some of the skills that you learned during your IHC fellow that you can transfer into working with people from other countries as well.
So what are some of the skills and practices that you have that are applicable? I mean, right now you're doing work, it's on your dissertation, but in a broader global context.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess I touched on this towards the end. I think part of that sense of an increased familiarity with some of the organizational aspects of how particular sites, well, I work particularly with some of my sites are active tourist sites in Tasmania, where I'm studying, as the Presidio and I think it was really interesting for me to partly become familiar with how those things work, and in a way that allowed me to feel more comfortable in navigating those contexts with particular directives in mind. So some of that is just about having a sense of who to contact about which issue or how to find out particular kinds of information. When I came to Tasmania, for example, one of my sites is a historic, it's a penal settlement, large industrialized, relatively speaking, large for Tasmania, place where convicts were sent. And it has a lot of visitors every year. It's Australia's most famous convict settlement. And just knowing that actually the archaeologist on site was probably one of the most useful people to talk to, and knowing that there was certain kind of information that I could get from talking to the archivist and orienting myself in that direction, perhaps more quickly than I might have after my experience working at the Trust, and really having that experience of knowing, both how to navigate the different protocols that the organization has, but also knowing where the little gold mines of knowledge and experience are. So I think that's something that I've definitely taken, and it's maybe a subtle thing, but in terms of feeling able to get kind of hooks in and know where to move straight away when I'm in a new context. Obviously, that's not going to be the same in every country because of the, organizational relationships are different, and even not all of my sites have that level of administration either. But that's definitely something that I feel is applicable for me.
Yeah. So my case is a bit different because so I didn't do the internship, right? I was doing a fellow design project. So I'm gonna maybe talk about the program as a whole. And I would say that, I mean, just like everything else, obviously everything else it's contextualized, right? So there's a lot of skills that you can transfer, but of course the localization of those skills will be on you when you're in a different context, right? So I think maybe the other way around. So I think the program also gives me some tools to navigate academia in the US, which was also something new for me as well. So, there are a lot of skills or like reflections and areas that you will work in the program that at first you might think this is very US based, and it is, but you can transfer them. But of course, it will be your job to see what is the most appropriate way to transfer them in different situations. Yeah.
You can hear me? Yeah. Yeah. So in my case, it's very similar to what my two colleagues were saying. In my case, I'm also an international student, and I started with the program, with the Public Humanities program during my first year at UCSB. So it really helped me understand also the university as an institution. And yes, yes, those years that we don't remember anymore. But I started on Zoom. I think I did the skills in person, and then we quickly turned to Zoom. But you come from another place with another academic culture, and you learn a lot about the institution you're placed in, and I think that's very important, and it's something that perhaps I had never really thought about that deeply. And in terms of the internship, it was also a very different organizational culture as well. For example, most of my work there was ensuring that it had a fair process and that it included everyone in the organization and that it was a democratic way of inaugurating this program. And that was also, even if I had worked in some other organizations, it was also a very different kind of paradigm because I was, in Europe, the arts sector is more related to the state in a way, or most of the institutions are either from the local government or the state itself. So there's not a lot of talk about how to make the organization, how to involve everyone. There's a program and you have to implement it. So this was a very different way of doing things, and something that has made me think about how to, if I ever wanted to do another project, how I would approach it from scratch in these terms.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for these presentations. I'm really happy to see how broad the scope of this all is. So I know Guillaume's work very well. So my questions are for Megan and Maria. So they're different questions. But first for Megan. So you were talking about your work at the Presidio, and not just the Presidio, but also in Australia, in Tasmania, about reimagining former colonial sites as in some way that have been turned into tourist attractions. I was just curious as to how you see the future of maybe something like the Presidio or the Mission as to something that is both appropriate for the sort of appropriate and accurate in colonial context, but also valuable for the public going forward.
Yeah, thank you. So just to clarify, you're interested to know how I see something like the Presidio as a site.
Yes, like
What-
if we were not to, for example, tear it down, how would you re-envision the purpose of it being?
Oh, to re-envision it in the future?
Yeah. Yes.
If it was to be torn down, sorry, it's just audio.
No,
that I'm telling
if
you.
we
If it
were
was to be torn down, did you say?
If we were not to tear it down, for example, if it were to stay.
To stay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much for that question. Yeah, it's great because it really engages, the way that where I came from in approaching this site, particularly because it's really interesting the history of the organization, because they were the ones initially who really drove the reconstruction of that. And I think one of the things that I ended up thinking about a lot was that I think in Santa Barbara, it's mostly there's small elements of it that are original, but not much of it. It's mostly reconstructed. It's all reconstructed. That was an archaeological site, and it was rebuilt. And I think the way it's perceived in Santa Barbara, there's not necessarily clarity around that, which is part of why the other histories of the space, such as the Asian American history of that space, are hard to kind of really imagine, because when you know that the fort is an 18th century fort and you don't have clarity about the fact that it was gone and then partially rebuilt, it's hard to imagine that anything else has been in that space. So that was something I thought about a lot, and as well as the longer indigenous histories of the land. And I think part of my kind of grappling with being in an institution like this that very much began with more of a kind of, let's celebrate the Spanish-Mexican colonial history of this era, a different kind of ethos than where it's been moving more recently. But the current organization, of course, inherits all of that physical space. And I think that's really the challenge, is in when you have this site, it exists in the way that it does, and it tells a story of a particular era in history. How do you engage with it in a way that has a different potential? It's not dissimilar to some of the debates around monuments, what to do with them, bring them down, re-curate them differently. But one of the things I saw happening at the Trust that I found really interesting, and I think has a lot of potential, is actually the indigenization of the history of the Presidio itself, because actually the identities of people in that entire period and within the Spanish colonial operation were not just European Spanish. They were mestizos of various descriptions, indigenous people from Mexico, indigenous people from California, Black mestizo people. So I think that's one of the potentials, or is in rethinking that history, not in order to sort of say, oh, the colonial period was actually really interesting and lovely and it had a lot of diversity, but to narrate it, to use the physical spaces to tell a different story, and a story of the land. And this was something I spoke with Ani Maria Elena Lopez, is how do we tell stories that maybe are not ours to tell? Well, we can talk about the land, and we can talk about what happened on that land and the impacts on the broader communities. So that's probably a very approximate answer to your question. But I think in looking at the ways we tell the stories of those sites, looking at how we think about them in terms of the land they occupy, what they're made of, how they change the spaces around them, and who actually are the people involved at all the different tiers of that change.
That's a really great answer. Thank you very much. Okay, my other question for Maria is, I think just in seeing your presentation about where you did your internship versus where you the department that you're in here at UCSB, they seem so different because you come from what, comparative literature, is that right? And your internship was with the climate. What was the name of it? Climate. There we go. Community Environmental Council. It sounds so different, and so I mean, I'm sure you were able to find that thread in between your own research interests and what the goals of that organization were about. And so my question is a bit more broad, just like how did you go about navigating that very different space and seeing yourself as somebody who fit there in that organization with maybe different goals than what you normally think about here as an academic in your own research?
Thank you for that question. Well, I work in the environmental humanities, which tries to, it's a constant problem of interdisciplinarity and how to speak to people across not only in the humanities, but also in the sciences. But it is true that CEC was a very different, it was not a project in an arts institution that wanted to talk about the environment. And I think with my training in comparative literature, that's something that I could easily do in a way because, I'm engaging a lot of literary and artistic material that talks about that relationship. But the CEC is a different space in the sense that what their main areas of activity are not related to narrative of art in a strict sense, but more related to specific programs, like helping people get solar power and very practical things. So when we were, not only me, but also with other people who were also in the arts trying to collaborate with this project, when we were talking about it, there was this tendency in the CC to want a project that proposed solutions, and the people from the arts were thinking, how do we do that from the arts, right? So I don't think the question was solved, but through the lens of storytelling, I think there was a way of speaking the same language in a way, right? They want to tell a positive environmental story or an environmental justice story. And that's something that from comparative literature we can do, or from the environmental humanities we also can do. So there was a way of finding that space in common. Although sometimes when I talk to the people who work there and they explain to me the kinds of things that they were doing in more specific ways, I really had to ask for more details and explanations, and for them to translate for me what it is that they were specifically doing as well. But yeah, I think it can work, and you can create those spaces where you can have the same goals and try to find that common language.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess my question was because I've seen like all of you have done a lot of work during this fellowship as well. Like you have taken classes and you have done internship. So I was just curious, like, do you have, like, how do you manage all of that on top of grad school, writing papers, attending conferences? I guess, do you have any advices for future fellows and stuff like that?
With all graduate work, the short answer is with difficulty. But I think for me, I didn't do it. I didn't do this until a bit later in my graduate studies. I didn't do it in order, which I think was one of the nice things about the fellowship, and that you can space it out a bit too. So the flexibility of the structure was actually, that was really good thing for me. When I started on I started with the skills unit rather than the theory unit, and in theory that's backwards, but it didn't really matter, and I was able to do it the next time around. So it was a couple of years, I guess, that I was in the program before I did my before I did the in the practice fellowship internship. So that was the key thing, I think, for me, was doing it late-ish. I was amazed that someone would do it in their first year. Amazing. But yeah, doing it late, and also just the flexibility. So I was done with at least one point. I was done with other coursework when I was doing the seminar. So.
Yeah. So similarly, like I think the flexibility it's key. That's true. You can sort of like space it out if you need to. Or I started on my second year, and I also started with the skills module, and then I did the history and theory in my third one, and I just finished the project. Right, I'm in my fifth year. So I guess another thing that that worked well for me was trying to which the program was actually open, trying to link it as much as possible to the things that I was already doing, right? So I was already working with this community, and we already thought about making these things, this sort of material, right? So linking to things that are part of the things that you're doing, and I know that you want to do similar things, definitely obviously will help because it is part of you, right? And it's something that can help the work that you're already doing, that is already publicly engaged. Just this can boost it a little bit.
My case is very similar to Megan's. I started during my first year, and then I waited a few years until we were back also in person to do the internship portion. So I think that was a good choice in terms of helping me manage the time, and I had already, all of my requirements had already been, for my program, had already been completed, and I felt that I had some room also to complete the public humanities program and do that in person as well, since, it was, I think, a better opportunity to work with people than do that over Zoom or things like that at that time. But yeah, taking the time and thinking about what kind of project or internship you would like to do might also be a good idea as you're learning about the methods.
Thank you.
I have a question for the audience. So I'm interested in learning whether you saw any through lines in the three presentations. Sort of, was there anything that came up that was continuous, sort of that was emphasized in terms of doing this kind of work, or apprenticing, no matter how advanced you are, doing this kind of work? Did anything strike you or not? Yeah?
Yeah, for me, I think all of the three presenters here, their work are very centered upon the community that they're working with, and they're always thinking about how they can involve the community and how their projects can be as inclusive as it can be. And that's why I really appreciate. Yeah.
Were you struck by anything, all the panelists hearing one another? Did you hear yourself any echoes or resonances?
Yeah, I think as we just said, like it was nice. I mean, maybe you would call it obvious for this kind of work, but it was nice to see the community-centered nature of all of these things. And I also think that we'll mention the grant writing and the budgeting and the smaller, like, these organizational skills that you get. Yeah.
One thing that just came to mind is also this, we go to other organizations to do publicly engaged work, thinking that, well, they have the structure to do the publicly engaged work, but sometimes, institutions outside of the university also have their own accessibility or narrative questions that they need, that they want to reformulate as well. So I think that's something that I saw across the presentations, wanting to, how that space of, how the institutions, the public institutions themselves are also thinking about how to reframe their missions and their activities. So it's not something that, we go there and they teach us how to do the public work. They're also figuring out how to do the public work in some ways. So I think it's a bi-directional learning process.
I have a question, and this is to all. The question is, what did you bring to your projects?
I can start. I will start saying the linguistics skills of analyzing the language. This is not a language that has an established way of writing, so we had to come up with some systematic way of doing that, and in that way, my training as a linguist came pretty useful. But especially the organizational skills that we were mentioning now. So as we saw, there were a lot of people involved in this project, from community members in Mexico, community members here, other graduate students that helped us with the coding of the game, undergraduate research assistants that helped us proofreading the English and the Spanish versions of the books, and just organizing all of these people, getting the money, budgeting for this. The reading project in particular, also we got a small grant from the Foundation of Indigenous Languages to pay the illustrators that made all the. So I guess apart from the linguistic skills that help with the language, in my case it was especially organizational. So it's just organizing everyone and mediate the communication between all of these different groups. We had some meetings with my research assistants. We normally meet every 2 weeks, and the community members are invited to come. And so also do that mediation, which sometimes it's literally interpretation, because sometimes it's interpreting Spanish and English and the other way around, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just we speak very differently in different contexts, right? So translating the academic context to community and the other way around.
Sorry, would someone mind just repeating the question for me?
What did you bring to the
Yeah, so that was really interesting for me because I had I felt very directed around what I was thinking of as decolonial, and which just sort of shifted somewhat to think more about as indigenizing in context with, in conversation with Ani Maria Elena. And I didn't know at first, because that wasn't in the kind of official job description. But actually in the interview, when they asked me, what I said, I'm interested in that, this, and they kind of lit up and they're like, oh, good, blah, 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 blah. So that was really interesting to kind of be like, this is welcome. And also I've got to work it out myself to some degree how to do that. So that was kind of partly what I was bringing as a concern or an interest or a particular thing that I wanted to approach it from, as well as to some degree a skill set that I brought with me.
Talk about the skill set a little bit. You're into material culture and how that manifests.
Yeah. Well, I guess also of course, like my training's in architectural history, so that was thinking about the sites in a spatial way and how to engage with the spaces, as well as the material culture of the trust has a lot of objects in its collection. They get used for teaching. And what I noticed about, because I was also working with lesson plans and previous examples of things that have been used, and what I realized was that I was able to bring to what had been done already a more focused, a greater focus on the materials and on the materiality and what we can learn from the spaces and the things themselves. I think some of the work that existed was, using objects as a point of departure for a discussion. An example was a little martini glass that had been in Jimmy's Oriental Gardens, and using this to talk about different kinds of social occasions and those kind of things. Bringing skills from material culture analysis allowed me to go, well, what would it mean if we actually started with getting people to make observations about the glass and say, like, how much liquid does it hold? Is it an everyday glass? Is it what makes you think it's for a special occasion? Why? Well, it doesn't hold much liquid. It's not a very practical shape, all of these kind of things. So kind of bringing into that historical work observations of objects and of spaces that can make the connections between the actual material and the histories. The lesson plan that I mentioned, I wanted to try to get students to stand in that Presidio space and reimagine, because it wasn't just the Japanese Buddhist church that was there, and it was called a church, which is interesting in itself. But there were also tenement houses in that space. There were a whole bunch of structures, and I wanted to create something where students could try to imagine those things in that space. And I think I really use from my training in learning to look closely at plans and maps and look at how these were overlaid. Where is the Presidio Chapel exactly in relation to where the Buddhist church has been? Where would we draw these lines? How would the students move through the space? Those were definitely skills that I was bringing into that internship.
In my case, I think it was more practical research skills in general, not necessarily related to how the methods of my academic research, but there was initially one of my tasks was to create best practices reports. So I looked into a lot of different national reports of projects that had been successful in similar locations and with similar aims, and trying to bring that together to help CEC have, in the same way you write a grant application where you collect different similar projects and you identify your area of intervention or where you can contribute something with the skills you have. So I used my research skills to create those kinds of resources for them to use later on when they as they implement the project itself. And then additionally, I would say also precisely this question of the interest. Where do environmental questions intersect with the arts? So trying to figure that out in a way that would be accessible for everyone who was involved in the project was also something that I think I was able to help them with.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to say, first of all, thank you for the three of you so much for sharing your work and your thinking about the role of the public humanities in your own intellectual development. And I want to invite everybody here now to have some refreshments with us and celebrate. Megan, we're going to miss our ability to toast you live, I'm sorry to say. So we will send you warm congratulations for the great work you've done in the program. And yeah, so thank you all for coming, and let's just move into the other room and continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great job.
eat some cheese for me.